Oil and gas have powered our lives, but the focus now is on opportunity cost, sustainability versus end-user price point, and reliability of supply. Directly or indirectly, the oil and gas industries account for more than 40% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. To talk about the ramifications of the transition to renewables for these industries, I'm joined by Dr Roberto Aguilera, Senior Research Fellow and Energy Economist at Curtin University in Perth. Welcome, Roberto.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
All right, let's start with the export market. Will pressure continue to mount on countries to prove their energy exports are generated from green sources? And if so, what does that mean for the oil and gas industries and how do they compete?
Well, to put it into context, after the pandemic, there was an unprecedented pressure for the fossil fuel industries to improve their environmental performance throughout the entire supply chain, including in the delivery of those products. Now, with everything that's been going on this year with Russia, Ukraine, some of that has begun to slide off of the policy agenda, and other important topics like energy security and affordability have taken center stage because consumers want their energy services to be available and they don't want to pay excessively high prices for them. So it's kind of a confusing time for fossil fuel producers. They're trying to reduce their emissions or offset their emissions, but at the same time provide accessible energy to the world to ensure that there's economic growth everywhere, particularly in the developing world.
We are seeing energy markets pivot towards natural gas over oil and coal, but gas has its own green credential challenges. Is this a transitionary energy source, would you say?
Natural gas around a decade ago was something of a golden fuel. It was thought to be the bridge fuel towards a low carbon future. But just over maybe the past 3-4 years, even natural gas has become pretty unpopular because it's still a fossil fuel. Even if it's the cleanest of the fossil fuels, it emits much less CO2 than oil and coal when burned. But nevertheless, natural gas does have a likely important role in the long-term future in that it can also help with the development of renewables because, of course, sources like solar and wind have the problem of intermittency. They're not always available when needed. So this is where you need backup, such as natural gas, which can be brought online and offline very quickly. And therefore, gas can indeed lead to increased development of renewables.
Well, supply chains have been disrupted over the past couple of years due to the pandemic. We've also seen the oil prices go up, and we're seeing that affecting the prices at the pump. But oil largely underpins transport fuels. So what is a realistic pathway to batteries and or hydrogen fuel cells powering our supply chains?
It's a good question. The transportation sector is particularly difficult to decarbonize because there's no large-scale substitute to oil-derived products. It's different for electricity, where you have competing sources like gas, coal, nuclear, and renewables, but it's really an oil-centric market in transportation. There are some other options that are more expensive and are experiencing rapid growth, but from a low base. What you said, electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. And they are becoming more competitive these days with high fossil fuel prices, and it can even be cheaper to run an electric vehicle. But there's that upfront cost, which is more expensive. Even the cheapest electric vehicle might be 3 times more expensive than the cheapest petrol-based vehicle. And then there's hydrogen too, which will also have to compete, economically speaking, with the alternatives, with devices that use alternatives like the electric vehicle. So hydrogen probably has a brighter future in longer haul, heavy-duty transportation, like the trucking industry, for example.
Yeah, you touch on hydrogen there. The stakes are high in the global race to conquer the production, storage and transport of green hydrogen at scale and consumer affordability. What countries are leading the way and how?
Australia is one of the leaders because we have a national hydrogen strategy, and although it does give some importance to hydrogen for domestic usage, exports are a big part of it. And of course, that will primarily target the Asia Pacific, the usual trade partners like Korea, Japan, China. It'll also go to Europe, which is expected to be a major importer of hydrogen. And it makes sense because we have the strong renewable potential here, which is needed for the electricity that is applied to water to extract the hydrogen. But we also have natural gas, which can also be separated into hydrogen. The problem is that there's a CO2 byproduct, but if that can be captured and stored underground with CCS, then also that would be a clean hydrogen option.
I think we all agree that, clean fuel, clean energy is the way to go. But, fossil fuels, we're so used to them, and it can be politically unpopular, can't it? We've seen an election in Australia recently, and it can be politically unpopular in rural areas to move away from fossil fuels. So how do you think we can get over that?
It's complicated because, as we've seen, the public is supportive of improved environmental performance and efforts to stabilize climate, yet at the same time, they require affordable energy. So everybody has a role to play, including the public with our choices, policymakers with the rules they set up, and the producers themselves, importantly, including of oil and gas. And they're doing whatever they can to obtain that social license to operate, like investing in clean technologies like CCS or hydrogen or nature-based offsets like the planting of trees, whatever they can do to reduce emissions throughout their supply chain.
Well, you grew up in Alberta, Canada. It's an oil and gas city in Canada there. And in Australia, we're seeing a big uptake of solar. So how's Australia doing compared to Canada and other countries when it comes to the uptake of solar?
Well, Australia is still fairly dependent on fossil fuels when it comes to exports, and also for our own domestic energy mix. It's the same with Canada. You mentioned Alberta. That's a place whose economy seems to go up and down together with the price of oil. That being said, despite that heavy reliance on fossil fuels in Australia, we are very advanced here with the development of solar, which makes sense because we have such huge solar potential and also wind potential. And that is expected to continue, especially now that these industries are likely to get more policy support with the new government.
And elsewhere in Asia, you mentioned Australia being ahead of the curve compared to other countries. What about, big countries in Southeast Asia and, being so reliant on fossil fuels? How difficult will it be to get them to come through to clean energy?
Those countries also have ambitious goals to decarbonize and are seeing rapid progress. The problem is that all of this comes from a very low base. So renewables are growing much faster than the fossil fuels, but overall, oil, gas, coal still play an important role. And some of those countries in Asia, of course, are on more modest incomes, so it becomes harder for them to afford an energy transition. Yet on the demand side, on the consumption side, they'll play an important role too. And they are implementing policies and making agreements with producers like Australia to also embark on an energy transition.
I think we all agree that clean energy is the answer, but how to get there, we don't seem to agree on that. Thank you very much to Dr. Roberto Aguilera, Senior Research Fellow and Energy Economist at Curtin University in Perth. Thanks very much for joining us on Circular Economies.